A brand new study comes out and indicates there's less Christians in America today than there was 10 years ago. We'll discuss that on today's broadcast.
J. Warner Wallace is a cold case homicide detective who's been investigating cold case murders in Los Angeles County for over a decade. His work has been featured on Fox News, Dateline, and Court TV. Now, we join him as he applies his investigative skills to making a case for Christianity.
Thanks for joining us on the Cold-Case Christianity Broadcast. I'm Jimmy Wallace.
And I'm J. Warner Wallace. And today we're going to hop into some new data results, poll surveys, that show that there's a continuing decline of Christians in America. Now, this started a number of years ago when the Pew Research Center started doing surveys. And there was a lot of discussion, if you remember, Jimmy, years ago about this first survey that came. I think they started in 2007, but there was a survey, I think, in 2012, and we saw these numbers, and they were comparing them over the last couple of decades, and it looks bleak in the sense that the number of people who self-identify as Christians appears to continue to be dropping at least a percentage a year, 12% over the last decade. So, I mean, do you remember we talked about this a long time ago when we were first talking about the decline of Christianity?
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like the trend has just continued. I think as Christians, the church has known that there is some type of problem, especially with people from my generation, millennials or younger. But for whatever reason, it doesn't seem like the steps we're taking, at least in the last 10 years, does not seem to be stemming the tide of this. It seems to be a continuing trend.
And maybe there's just nothing we can do, really, because it's a bigger cultural issue. That's what we want to do today. We're going to talk about 4 or 5 reasons why we think Christianity is declining in America. And we're going to start by showing you the actual survey from Pew Research Center. It's online. It was published on December 14th of 2021. About 3 in 10 U.S. adults are now religiously unaffiliated. So here's what it basically says. I'll just kind of pick a couple of paragraphs out. The secularizing shifts evident in American society so far in the 21st century show no signs of slowing. The latest Pew Research Center survey of the religious composition of the United States finds the religiously unaffiliated. These are people, when on the survey they say, what religious affiliation do you have? And they check none. We've always been talking about this as the rise of the nones, the people who identify with no religious affiliation. That continues to increase. And here it says that the United States finds the religiously unaffiliated share of the public is 6 percentage points higher. Now, that's interesting. While than it was 5 years ago, and 10 points higher than a decade ago. So here's what's happening. It's not that people are identifying less as Christians and more as atheists. There may be, of course, some atheists in the religiously unaffiliated, but not necessarily. When you poll these folks, they often will tell you they still believe in some kind of a higher power, but they no longer identify as a Christian. So the people who identify, definitely as atheist or agnostic is not rising as high and as fast as the number of religiously unaffiliated. So don't be confused by this. This doesn't mean that they're jumping ship to atheism. They're just leaving their Christian identity. So there's a chart on this page. I suggest you take a look at it, but here's what it basically comes down to. Currently, about 3 in 10 U.S. adults, 29% are religious nones. People who describe themselves as atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular. Now, there's the group. It turns out that the atheist and agnostic portion is not growing as fast as the nothing in particular portion when they're asked about religious identity. Self-identified Christians of all varieties, including Protestants, Catholics, members of the Church. That's the other thing. They're including here members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, we would probably not, we wouldn't include that group as Christians. And it also includes Greek Orthodox Christians. They make up about 63% of the population. And so Christians now outnumber religious nones by a ratio of a little more than 2 to 1. In 2007, when the center began asking its current question about religious identity, Christians outnumbered nones by almost 5 to 1, 78% versus 16. So there are clearly some declines. You can kind of parse this out and see from the study what the rate of decline is amongst either denominations or people who identify themselves as Catholic or as Orthodox or even as LDS. You can see this in the charts. But regardless, to say this is put this way, there's no upward trajectory. Everything is a downward trajectory. We're shrinking. So the question then becomes, well, why are we shrinking? So we're going to posit a few potential responses, potential reasons. And you can kind of see this in other reports that are made about this Pew report. Other people are starting to think, well, why is this the case? And they're starting to talk about it online. So, Jimmy, do you want to throw out what you think maybe is one of the first reasons why we're seeing a decline?
Well, I think one of the interesting things is that these people who are leaving Christianity, we're seeing the decline in Christianity. The people who leave Christianity don't necessarily give up all their religious beliefs. They might believe that there's a God, they have some spiritual beliefs, but they not only leave Christianity, but they don't join like another religion. This isn't an issue of converting. And they don't necessarily even go all the way to atheism. They don't believe there is a God. So it seems to show that there's something about Christianity that they, for some reason, don't like, but not necessarily that they're drawn to something else in particular. I think that's just kind of an interesting kind of subtlety in the data, and I think it shows maybe an opportunity for the Christian church. But yeah, there's a number of reasons why we would see this change. I think some of it might just be cultural, that the culture as a whole is changing.
Yeah, this is true, and I think as we were probably would have said in the South, where our family comes from, that entire region is so identified with their Christian worldview that if you wanted to be a leader in the local community, you're going to probably have to identify with one of the local churches, be a member in good standing. There's a cultural phenomena of kind of a cultural Christianity, and of course, as fewer and fewer people identify as Christians, and the culture starts to identify more and more as secular, well, then no surprise, we're going to see more and more people who are just in it because they love the cultural identity it gives. They want to basically fit in. Well, then those people are not going to be Christians. But of course, we might as well have argued that those people probably were never Christians to begin with because they didn't see it as a proclamation about our status before God and our sin and the need for a Savior. They saw it more as, my cultural identity with my neighbors. And that probably was not. Let me throw another one out to you and see. So I think that's one. I think you're right. I think that the culture is identifying more and more as secular. And so for that reason, there's less and less people who are interested in a cultural identity that's Christian. Let me offer another one here, and then we'll maybe go to a third. It seems to me that a lot of this is about birth rates, right? That we have kind of bought as the Christian family a lower... So would you say that millennials probably are... Like, how many of your friends are having huge families as Christians?
I mean, I definitely think that the expectation, at least this is my perception of it, that in the 1800s, the expectation of you having was that you would have a large family. If you had 6 kids, that may not be have been seen as unusual. But today, certainly, at least here in Southern California, if you met somebody who's got 6 kids, I know a few people who've they're definitely the outliers, and people will really want to talk about them because they're so unusual. How are they doing it with all these kids? So I think things have certainly changed. And so for that reason alone, we shouldn't be surprised if Christians are having less children. And then we're just going to have less people who are kind of born into the faith. So I think I don't know if this is necessarily something we should be concerned about or not. I don't know necessarily exactly where I fall, but it certainly helps to explain some of this data. We shouldn't expect that we should expect a decline of Christians if there's less people just simply being born into Christian families.
Yeah, it's a good point because, the reality of it is the first and primary indicator of what will determine your views about any number of things is what did your parents believe about it. That is still, now look, a lot of us, of course, will move against our parents' beliefs, but for most people in the world, the primary predictor of where you will land in terms of your religious belief is what was the religious perspective of your parents.
Yeah, if you just wanted to increase Christianity just on numbers alone, it's just a pure numbers game, then if Christians just have enormous amounts of children, that is going to naturally lead to more people out there in the world, a bigger percentage having Christian beliefs, because at least a majority of those kids are probably going to remain Christians their entire life because that's how they grew up.
Yeah, I honestly don't know what the numbers are, but I don't think we are much higher in terms of numbers, probably a little bit higher than the secular world around us. I think with birth control, with the advent of kind of the choices you can make in terms of birth control, that the people are making choices, and the view that children are a blessing, arrows in your quiver, is not a view that most even young Christians hold. I think we kind of see it as, hey, how are we going to be able to afford this? Like, I know we're supposed to trust God for these things, but I don't have enough money to have a bunch of kids. And what we see is there's another article out here, and I want to point it to you. It's a TRT World, and I'll put it on the screen for you. It's which religion will be the largest by the end of the century. And what they're really talking about here is Islam and the growth of Islam. And that by 2050, this report says, the number of Muslims will nearly equal the number of Christians around the world. We still are the largest group, but Muslims are catching up with us. And it says, indeed, Muslims will grow more than twice as fast as the overall world population between 2015 and 2060. And in the second half of this century will likely surpass Christians. Now, certainly we would say this in westernized cultures, but Christianity is still growing in other parts of the world. But still, it will likely surpass Christians as the world's largest religious group. And of course, when they talk about it, it says, why? Well, the first and foremost reason offered, and it's from a Pew study, is that around the world, each Muslim woman has an average of 2.9 children, compared with 2.2 for all other groups combined. Now, that means that the people who are in Europe who are having 1.1 or 1.2 that are factored into this, Muslims are having kids at a much faster pace and with much larger size families. And that's why I think we're seeing part of this decline.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. I think that, like we're saying, if we're just looking at the numbers of people who identify by any faith, the groups that are having the most amount of children over the longest amount of time eventually are going to surpass everybody else. And I think we just shouldn't be surprised by that. And we can consider this when we're thinking about making, starting our own families. But a lot of the traditionally Christian countries, the countries that have been Christian for the longest, like America, where at the beginning of our country we had a huge majority Christian population. These are also now, hundreds of years later, some of the most expensive places to live. Here I'm talking to you from Southern California. To have a 6-7 kids is extremely expensive, because I've got to buy a house that somehow can house all those people. Like even a 2 or 3 bedroom house in my neighborhood is exorbitantly expensive. So there's a lot of factors I think that play into our decision to start a family. How many kids should we have? Can we have? But I definitely think this helps to explain some of why we're seeing the percentage of Christianity decline. But I don't think it's the only thing deciding it.
No, I agree. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about a few more reasons why Christianity is declining in America.
Jay Warner and Susie Wallace have written 3 kids' books to help children know the truth and defend it in the public square. All 3 books mirror Jay Warner's adult books, chapter by chapter. And best yet, the kids' books are written as fictional stories that will turn your kids into detectives as they solve mysteries and learn about Christianity. There's also an interactive academy website at casemakersacademy.com, where your kids can join other cadets and complete their own academy notebook. Each course has free videos, activity sheets, and more. Your young readers can even earn their own Junior Detective graduation certificates and appear on the Honor Cadet Wall. Be sure to visit casemakersacademy.com to learn more.
Okay, so there's some reasons, I think, why we might be seeing Christianity decline in America. Let's go to a couple more here, and then we'll try to wrap up and maybe give some hope at the end of all this. But there is also a sense, and you see this, and I wanted to show you an article from Yahoo News. And so here it is on Yahoo News, the weird spiral of declining Christianity in America. Now, what's interesting about articles like this is that they take the data from the Pew report, and they talk about it, you see it over and over. Almost every article I've seen talking about the Pew data as a news release links it to politics. How did Donald Trump help the Christian movement? How did Donald Trump hurt the Christian movement? This article is no different. And I do think that that our connection with Christianity and politics is one of the reasons why we're seeing an accelerated decline. What do you think, especially from your perspective, Jimmy, as a millennial, somebody who is a lot younger than me?
Yeah, I can tell you that I think at least for people my age and probably a little bit younger than me, it can be. I know a lot of people who would describe themselves as being turned off to Christianity because they see Christianity and politics as being almost like one thing, when they hear somebody say they're a Christian or they've heard I said I was a Christian, they assume something about my religious beliefs, but they also assume something about my political beliefs because they believe that they're not just related, but almost one and the same. And I think that this creates a problem because for that person I'm talking to, for them to hear the Christian stuff, they're seeing it through the lens of their political views. And for them to accept Christianity, they are first sometimes asking themselves, I think a lot of people from my generation would think about this, hey, if I was a Christian, or if I stay in Christianity, I'm a Christian now, but if I stay here, I have to vote for this political party, this political candidate, this political issue. Now, this is not to say that Christianity, any belief that we have, but especially Christianity, should influence the way we vote. But I think if we're trying to assess the truth of Christianity, hey, is Christianity true? Did Jesus really live and die and say he was God and raised from the dead? We need to kind of put aside these questions of how does this affect me? What is this going to mean for my life? And just ask the question, is this true? Now, if Christianity is true, yes, of course it's going to influence not just your politics, but the way you live your day-to-day life, the way you interact with your friends, your marriage, whatever. But I think sometimes people don't even get to the question of is Christianity true because they stop at that, well, if I accept Christianity, I'm going to have to believe X, Y, and Z politically. Some of those things maybe you don't even have to believe as a Christian. I mean, you'll see some variation within Christianity, but I think there's a logical problem or a problem with our reasoning if before we ask the question, is Christianity true, we first ask ourselves, well, what is this going to mean for me? What am I going to have to do as a result of this? That's just not the proper way to approach the question.
Yeah, let me just throw this out. So here's the kind of the principle that I've kind of called myself to personally when it comes to politics, is that I only want to identify with one person, Jesus of Nazareth. And I will then advance and make a case for all kinds of issues that come out of the teaching of Jesus of Nazareth. But I don't want to be seen and attached and connected, especially as somebody who's trying to reach Gen Z, trying to reach millennials. I do not want to be connected to any other person, political candidate, even lots of members of my own family. I want to be connected and identified with Jesus. And then all of the issues. Now, if you ask me about all of the secondary issues, all of the issues that come out of the teaching of Jesus, I'm prepared, and I do vote that. I'm voting for a future potential reality, not for a candidate. I don't want to identify every candidate, we voted for some good ones and some bad ones, and every candidate historically in my life has let me down in one way or another. But some have done a better job than others in advancing the causes, the issues, and creating a better future world, even though they might have been great or lame. But the issue I'm voting for is I'm voting for potential future realities. So I wonder if part of it, you tell me if I'm wrong, for millennials, is that it's like if you said, oh, you're a Christian, when they in their mind's eye, like, whose face do they see you identified with? And by the way, we've done a poor job of this. We take pictures with candidates. We elevate our relationship to candidates. And so I think for a lot of millennials, when they think of, well, you're a Christian, therefore they see, if they were in their mind's eye to see you standing next to somebody, would they be seeing you in their mind's eye standing next to a particular political candidate? Because if they don't like that guy or gal, then they all don't want to be part of this. If I got to stand in support, if I got to post on my social media in favor of that knucklehead, I don't want any part of it. And I think that for me, I want to say the knuckleheads don't matter. What matters are the claims of Christianity, the teaching of Jesus, and how we are to try to embody those teachings, even politically in the world.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what we got to address. Hey, are the claims of Christianity true? And then, if they are true, okay, now what do I practically need to do in my life? Not just my political views, but hey, how should I be living morally? How should what should I be spending my time on? There's a lot of implications to Christianity being true. Politics, one of them, but we need to address that question first. I think a lot of people my age are not asking that question first. They're saying, hey, what does this mean for me politically or personally before they get to that question, is Christianity true?
Well, do you find too that they're asking this question? And I was just talking to Jonathan McRae at What Do You Meme channel on YouTube. It's got a great channel. And for millennials, is it really more an issue about how this makes me feel? How do I feel being associated with this group, rather than, well, are there objective realities and facts that would indicate this is true, and therefore I want to be in the truth? Or is it really more about, I want to be in a place where I feel good?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure if I could. I don't know if I'm ready to paint with a broad brush, but even if that was the case, all millennials do care about how they feel about a certain issue. I think that's a perfect way that that's an open door for us to express how Christianity offers something real, something that answers those same needs, or the same things that they want. Christianity still has an offering for that. So I think even if that is true, there's a way to reach them. But I think sometimes the politics and religion gets so viewed as one item that people struggle to assess Christianity fairly. And so I think maybe we could take some steps to help people to see this Christian question is more important than even the political question or other questions we might have.
Yeah. How about this as another reason why I think that Christianity is declining in America? The arbiters of truth. Now, maybe this has changed in the COVID year that we just experienced, because I'm not sure how people look at scientists anymore. But for a long time, it has been in our culture that if you were looking for a truth teller, more people trusted scientists as truth tellers, as authoritative, than they did their religious leaders. And there's a sense that these two things are absolutely incompatible, especially right now, politically, in a world in which, for the most part, they see us as Christians as science deniers when it comes to mask mandates and vaccinations and all these things that they connect with scientific discovery. And we are in a world where the sciences are seen more and more authoritative. Therefore, scientists are given a place of privilege that maybe in the past was held by religious leaders in church. How do you think that is playing out with millennials?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people outside the church who would definitely see these things. I mean, you see this all the time in popular media, on the news. There's this idea that there's science, which is true, and it is in some way in conflict with religion. And unfortunately, I think I even see this with some members of the church who I don't know if it's because they grew up in a culture that told them this, or for some reason also kind of buy off on this idea that science and religion are in conflict. I think the problem is, for people my age and younger, I think that for the most part, at least the people I've experienced, do have a high value for scientific truth, for the idea that there's truth in general. But they look, to find that truth, they look to the sciences because they believe this is something that's trustworthy. And I think if the story, the narrative in the media or even in our churches is that science and religion are in conflict, but we have a people group we're speaking to that place a very high value on science, well, it shouldn't surprise us that then they would choose, well, if I got to choose one or the other, I guess I got to choose science. You're almost putting me in a poor position. When I think the reality is, you and I both know that science is not in conflict with Christianity. In fact, modern scientific discoveries seem to only further emphasize the truth that is told in Scripture. So I don't think that this is a choice we need to make, but I think that the media, certainly, the culture at large, wants to tell our young Christians that there is a battle between these, and you've got to pick sides. And I think as a church, at least some churches I've gone to have not always done a great job dispelling that, taking that narrative away. They've almost played into it like, hey, yeah, you need to put place to your Bible. You need to read your Bible. Don't listen to that science stuff.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, we think that the Bible is the authoritative Word of God, but it's not to say
The
that we have
special
to,
revelation of God, the special revelation,
yes,
yep.
But it's not to say that we have to discard science to get to it. We can read our Bible right, and as soon as our quiet time is done, open up a biology book, and it's all the same reality. It's all just all the revelation, the truth of God.
The
but I think
natural
because
revelation
people think
of
that they're
Scripture.
pitted, people feel almost forced. I think as a young person, if I would almost feel forced. I got to choose one or the other, and I think that that's a bad place to put people in, because I think most people would choose science. It's something that's real. You can touch it. It's your real experience.
Mm-hmm. And when I think about this is why I wrote a whole chapter in the book of Person of Interest, talking about the amazing, oversized, unparalleled impact of Christians in the history of science, leading up and including to today. We just was on a show for James Tour, a nanochemist, who's one of the foremost experts in his field. No problem embracing Jesus as Lord, yet working in a field that is highly technical. These are not in opposition. We have a few minutes left. Let's throw one last thing out here before I go to you for some hope on this. And that is this idea that we are in a world right now, fifth reason, well, I think you've got people who are more and more independent, more and more individualized, right? I mean, this last season for Christmas, we were watching all of the old 1940s Christmas shows, Mom and I, and we've been watching them all, these movies, some great movies. I think my favorite of all those was The Bishop's Wife, really great movie. But I was able to access those immediately in my own time. You could not have done that when I was a kid. How would you watch that show? Well, where would you go to see it? I've got access to everything in a very individualized, on-demand way. Yet Christianity argues that it's not about you, it's about Jesus and your sin, and this starts with you bending a knee. In a world right now where, for the most part, we aren't asking young people to bend their knee. Instead, we're saying, no, you can get it on demand. You can get it whenever you want it, however you want it, whatever perspective you want to see. So I think this autonomy, this individualism is making it harder for us to convey the value of a worldview that says it's not about your Instagram post. It's not about your TikTok influencers. It's about God. And it starts with you realizing that you're not God. I think it's going to be harder in a culture that kind of elevates everyone to some form of godhood. Now listen, before, I know I just kind of threw that in, I wanted to make sure I get that out there, but I want to come back to you. Give me if you're watching this, give me 30 seconds why I shouldn't feel despair.
Yeah, I think it can be very doom and gloom, and I actually see that from some Christians sometimes where you feel like, man, everything is just so bad. And certainly, would I love for the majority of people to be Christians? Absolutely. Would I even a majority is probably not enough. I'd love every single person to be a Christian. But I think that there can be a silver lining for us, and that's the mission field that we get. In a time when, if we lived in a world where 80% of people were Christian, and maybe we did in some time in the past live in a world like that, I know people actually even today that every single person in their small town would say that they're a Christian. That's not much of a mission field. Now we're going to be going into a world, if things continue to trend this way, we're going to end up with a world closer to like the one that the first Christians lived in, that Paul lives in the first century. But look at what amazing work God was able to do with them in their own lives. Paul was able to be this great evangelist and cause for Christ because he lived in a world where there were so many people to reach. So I don't know if we've felt apathetic in the past. Hey, everybody around us is Christian, but no longer should we feel like that. This should motivate us in our Christian faith. We're blessed by God to live in a time when there's so many people around us that we can reach for Him. That's a blessing. We don't need to look at that as a curse.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point, a good place to end. We are out of time.
Thanks so much for joining us for this edition of the broadcast. We'll see you next week.
To hear more from J. Warner Wallace, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. For more information on this week's topic, visit youtube.com/coldcasechristianity with J. Warner Wallace. Thank you for joining us on this Cold Case Christianity broadcast.